When you think about historical conquests, what usually comes to mind? Clashing armies, conquered lands, subjugated people. But what if a conquest was driven less by the sword and more by a really strict code of conduct? Today we're going to look at a campaign where the principles of the conquerors actually left a bigger mark than their victories. Okay, let's get into it.
Just stop and think about that statement for a second. This is a conquered people telling their conquerors they prefer their rule. How on earth does that happen? Well, to understand those words, we have to unpack a series of events that show a completely different way of thinking about power.
So, our story starts in 7th century Syria. It's this critical moment where two massive empires are about to collide, and one army is going to make a choice that pretty much defies all the normal rules of war. At this time, you've got the Byzantine Empire, a real titan of the ancient world. And they're facing this new, fast-moving force coming out of the Arabian Peninsula. For centuries, the rules of conquest were simple. The winner takes everything. If you lost, you could expect your city to be plundered, your people enslaved. You know the drill. But all of that was about to be challenged.
So, in the city of Homs, the Muslim army suddenly finds itself in a really tight spot. Their spies come back with bad news. A huge Byzantine army is on its way, bigger than anything they've ever faced. They're outnumbered, outmatched, and the commander, Abu Ubaydah, has to make a tough call. They need to fall back.
And this moment of retreat brings up a fascinating ethical question, right? The Muslim army had taken control of Homs, they had collected taxes from the non-Muslim population, and in return, they promised to protect them. But now, they couldn't keep that promise. So what's the right thing to do?
Well, the answer is all about a core principle of their governance, a binding agreement, a covenant, between the ruler and the ruled. And this single principle is about to lead to one of the most remarkable acts in all of military history. At the heart of this whole thing was a tax called the jizya. Now, it's really important to understand what this was. It wasn't some kind of penalty for not being Muslim. It was a formal, specific payment in exchange for a state-backed guarantee. A guarantee to protect your life, your property, and your freedom to practice your own religion. It was, for all intents and purposes, a contract. And for the commander Abu Ubaydah, the terms of that contract were absolute, non-negotiable. His words here are just crystal clear. If they couldn't hold up their end of the bargain, which was protection, then they had absolutely no right to the money. This wasn't about being nice or about charity, it was about justice.
And what happened next was just incredible. Abu Ubaydah ordered his men to return every single coin they had collected. He told the people of Homs directly, the only reason we're giving your wealth back is because we don't want to take it when we can't protect you. It was this unbelievable act of integrity that led the people to say what they said, that this new kind of justice was better than anything they'd known before.
Now, this principle playing out on the ground was backed up by some absolutely brilliant strategy from the top. While Abu Ubaydah was busy upholding justice in Homs, the Caliph Umar was back in the capital, basically engineering the whole victory from afar.
Abu Ubaydah sent a message to the Caliph explaining just how bad things were. The army was trapped, the enemy was closing in, and a head-on fight would have been suicide. They needed a plan that was as unconventional as their principles.
Caliph Umar's reply was a masterclass in indirect warfare. First, he sent a fast cavalry unit to reinforce Homs. That's the obvious part. But the brilliant move was the second move. He sent another army, not to Homs, but to the homelands of the Byzantines' local allies. He didn't attack the enemy's army. He attacked the source of its strength.
And it worked like a charm. As soon as these allied tribes heard that a Muslim army was marching on their homes, they panicked. They completely abandoned the siege at Homs and raced back to defend their own families. This left the main Byzantine army all of a sudden isolated, confused, and demoralized. What started as a defensive crisis was turned into a decisive victory.
And this amazing blend of strategic genius and ethical leadership wasn't just a fluke. It came from a core teaching of humility, a constant reminder that real strength doesn't come from aggression, but from principle. As the Quran teaches, the servants of the Most Merciful are those who walk upon the earth easily, a value that guided them even in the heat of war.
And that whole story at Homs, it wasn't a one-off. As the campaign rolled on into Egypt, this same code of conduct was tested again and again, showing a consistent pattern of chivalry that was just as powerful as their military strategy.
Okay, so during the conquest of a town called Balbis, the daughter of the local Egyptian ruler, a young woman named Armanusa, was captured. Now, in the brutal world of 7th century warfare, you know what happens next. She's a high-value captive, a prize of war. She's basically property. But the Muslim commander, Umar ibn al-As, just wouldn't accept that. He stepped in and reminded his men of a higher principle from the Quran, that goodness should be met with goodness. He argued that since Armanusa's father had actually sent a gift to the Prophet Muhammad years before, they were bound by honor to repay that gesture. So in an act that must have shocked everyone, Armanusa was not only set free, but she was escorted back to her father with a full guard of honor, along with every single jewel, all of her wealth, and all of her servants.
And this leads to another one of those incredible, jaw-dropping statements, this time from Armanusa herself. After being returned, she declared that she felt her life and her honor were safer among her captors in what she called the tents of the Arabs than even in her own father's palace. This just perfectly captures the profound personal impact these principles of honor had on the very people they were conquering.
So, when you start to piece these stories together, you see a much bigger legacy taking shape. This wasn't just about random acts of kindness. It was a systematic approach to power, built on patience and tolerance, even when things got incredibly tough. And let's be clear, these campaigns were not a walk in the park. The siege of the fortress of Babaliyon in Egypt, for example, lasted for 7 brutal months. The soldiers faced incredible hardship and really fierce fighting. It's one thing to be principled when life is easy, but it's something else entirely to stick to that code when you're under extreme pressure.
Their ability to just keep going, to endure these long, grueling campaigns, was tied directly to a core spiritual teaching, patience, especially when the odds are stacked against you. They were guided by the Quranic idea, how often a small group overcame a mighty host by Allah's leave, and Allah is with the patient. This wasn't just a nice phrase, it was a strategic mindset that gave them the strength to see things through. And maybe the ultimate example of this whole philosophy in action was the conquest of Alexandria, one of the greatest cities in the ancient world. After it fell, there were no massacres, no mass enslavement. Instead, just like in Homs, the people were treated as protected people under that same covenant of safety and respect.
And when you trace it all back, this entire policy of tolerance and protection stems from one of the most fundamental principles of their faith, a direct command from the Quran, there shall be no compulsion in religion. This wasn't just a polite suggestion, it was a divine law that guaranteed religious freedom and literally shaped the way they governed.
So all of this leaves us with a pretty big final thought. The story of this conquest wasn't just about changing the lines on a map, it was about introducing a brand new idea. The idea that justice and honor and sticking to your word could be tools of power just as effective as any army. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How different would our history, and even our world today, if power was always bound by principle?